thewellnesscouch.com, streaming wellness into your lives.
You're listening to A Quirky Journey, the healthy family podcast with your hosts Jo Whitten and Fuad Kassab. Hi everyone, welcome back to A Quirky Journey. Today I have a fascinating interview for you. I'm going to be chatting with Dr. Kelly Brogan, who is a holistic psychiatrist from the US, and she'll be sharing with us her findings on healing anxiety and depression naturally without medications. When I heard Dr. Kelly was going to be speaking at this year's Mind Forum in Sydney in 1 week's time, and what she was speaking on, I got really excited because this is exactly what our family has been going through over the last 2 years, and we've been learning a lot about the benefits of healing naturally over using medication for depression and anxiety. And it's been a big learning curve for me and for us, and it's something that I was never taught. My doctor doesn't seem to have, this sort of knowledge, and it's something that I've had to look on the internet for and read up on myself. So when I heard that Dr. Kelly was going to be speaking on it, I started to listen to her podcasts and check her out on the internet, and wow, she has really helped a lot of people in this area, and it's so exciting to see that depression and anxiety can be healed naturally, and that medication is not a long-term solution, and it actually can contribute to a worsening of the condition. Now, a lot of what she's going to talk about, and what she talks about in her book as well, is oftentimes considered controversial. You may not agree with all of it, and I may not even agree with all of it, I'm not sure. So I think it's something that we do need to look into, though, because there's a lot of things happening in the world, a lot of people suffering from anxiety and depression. It's getting worse, not better. And the medications don't seem to be healing the problem, which we know generally medications don't heal the issue. They help to reduce symptoms, sometimes, not always. So what we need to do is get to the bottom of why it's happening and what we can do to help our children and our families to have healthy minds and healthy bodies. So Dr. Kelly has some really important things to share on this, and so I wanted to get her onto the podcast to share these with you, because I know not all of you can come to the Mind Forum, sadly. So I'd like for you to hear what she has to say. And sadly, Fuad couldn't be on the podcast today, which he was really looking forward to being here. So sorry about that. And we had a lot of questions we wanted to ask that I didn't have time for. It's quite a short podcast. It goes for half an hour. And but it's really practical. It's just a casual, practical chat like our podcasts usually are. So I just thought I'd give you a little bit of an intro first, because we had to get straight into it because Dr. Kelly doesn't have a lot of time. She's a busy lady. But it became really just a really good chat between two mums about, what we want for our children and what we want to share with the world, in that it's possible to heal naturally, and that she talks about the best direction that she feels people should go when anxiety and depression hit, and she really shares some good tips. So first, before we start, I just want to give you a bit of a background on what Dr. Kelly does and who she is. So she has a master's in neuroscience. She's a board-certified psychiatrist in the US, and she recently published a book which is already a bestseller, and it's called A Mind of Your Own. So you may have heard of it. It was very controversial in the media in America, especially because most of the media over there, they have a lot of advertisers that are big pharma, so they can't, pharmaceutical companies, so they couldn't really, they didn't take it on, basically. But it's still a bestseller, so it's really gotten out there, and it's about depression and big pharma, and it's a real eye-opener. So if you can get hold of this book, do read it. Dr. Kelly is really focused on practical, natural solutions for depression. So in this episode, she talks about why depression is not a disease, why the serotonin theory of depression is wrong, why many psychiatric diagnoses are caused by underlying physical ailments, which we know, gut health, etc., and how medications contribute to depression, and also what your first step should be if you suffer from depression. So if you know someone who suffers from depression and anxiety, if you are this person yourself, please listen, please pass it on. This podcast really does just scratch the surface of this subject. It's a big subject and there's so much more to learn. So if you found it interesting, you may like to buy her book. You can find it on Amazon or from her website, Dr. Kelly Brogan. And there's also a lot of other podcasts out there that have Dr. Kelly speaking on the podcast. There's quite a few of the Wellness Couch podcasts interviewing Kelly as well. So listen to all these podcasts, read the books, search out the information and find out all you can. And if you possibly can, come to the Mind Forum because you'll obviously get to hear her speak in person. And if you come to the speaker's reception on, I think it's on the Saturday night, which anyone is welcome to come to. You have to pay to come to it, but you get to actually talk to the speakers and have dinner with them. So I'd love to see some of you there. All right, so here's my discussion with Dr. Kelly Brogan. I hope you enjoy it. Just a little note here, if you notice this podcast sounds a little bit disjointed, we had some difficulties with the recording, so I've had to patch my voice in, so that's why it may sound a little bit disjointed. Sorry about that, but I hope you enjoy it anyway. Welcome, Kelly. So happy to have you on the show. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to come and chat with us. We would love for you to begin by talking about what you do and explaining a little bit about what your specialty is.
Sure. So I actually come from a very conventional family. You know, I wasn't raised a hippie or any sort of a new ager at all. And when I was in college at MIT, I actually worked a volunteer suicide hotline. It's a big issue at MIT, and for whatever reason, I was drawn to that. And it was supervised by psychiatrists, and I became very interested in essentially what I have learned is an illusion of our having cracked the code of human behavior, right? So I was studying neuroscience in college and working with a psychiatrist, and I thought, well, this is the way, you know, to work with human suffering and to get people out of their ruts, right? So this is the science of it. And I actually went to medical school to become a psychiatrist, but I've always been a feminist and in many different iterations of feminism, but I've always identified as one. And so it was very natural to me to specialize in caring for women specifically and mothers. And it really wasn't until my fellowship level specialization when I was becoming, I guess, expert in actually medicating with psychiatric medications pregnant and breastfeeding women, believe it or not, that I was pregnant myself. And I remember having this, you know, experience of this voice inside me that essentially, you know, told me, you know, I would never want to take one of these medications, despite the fact that I was writing hundreds of prescriptions, you know, every month for these women. You know, as a pregnant woman, I just felt something off about it. And I ignored that. And then it wasn't until I was 9 months postpartum that I was diagnosed with my first health condition ever. You know, I'd been basically trashing my body for 30 years up until that point, literally. And I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is an autoimmune thyroid condition. And that same voice, you know, sort of cropped up and I just felt like, well, this sucks. I don't want to take a medication for the rest of my life. No, I want a way out. And so strangely, I had the inclination to consult a naturopath, and I just knew that conventional medicine didn't have an exit door for me. You know, they only had a lifetime of prescribing. And I put into remission within 6 months what should be chronic and really unremitting and potentially even disabling condition. And it raised a lot of red flags for me. And the rest is history. Yeah, I began to do my own research on what it is that I hadn't quite learned in medical school.
Kelly, what started you down this path? Did you go through depression yourself, or was it more the Hashimoto's and searching out how to naturally heal your thyroid issues? And could you just explain a little bit about the symptoms of thyroid issues, what it looked like for you and how it can affect the mind?
So my thyroid symptoms were primarily brain fog, cognitive. They were primarily brain fog and fatigue, forgetfulness, flatness. I never experienced clinical depression. I'm very much somebody who spent a lot of my years feeling very revved and anxious. At one point, I even took a beta blocker, like a blood pressure medication, in my residency because my heart was racing nonstop. But part of why I think it's poetic that I ended up struggling with a thyroid condition is because I learned a hell of a lot about it, right? You always do when it's your health journey. And I learned that thyroid conditions can masquerade, as all sorts of psychiatric pathology, from depression to anxiety to even postpartum psychosis, panic attacks, and chronic fatigue. And so all of these labels can get slapped on you with associated medications unless your doctor knows what to look for, or you do, in terms of proper diagnosis. So it really helped to open me up to the fact that a lot of what we are calling psychiatric is in fact a reversible physiologic process.
So what would you say would be the cause of depression? I know you say it's not actually a chemical imbalance like we've been told, and it's and that you don't agree with the serotonin theory. Maybe you could just explain a little bit about that.
Sure. So this is a big one for people. It's really amazing how deeply this, what I'll go so far as to call a myth, has penetrated, sort of collective consciousness, where we have this idea that depression and really all mental illnesses are something you're probably born with, right? It's probably genetic, and it's a chemical imbalance, and it's one that you need medication to manage really for the rest of your life. And we liken it to, insulin to a diabetic, or eyeglasses for a myopic. And the truth is really, really quite far from that. If you delve into the literature the way that some very important pioneers have, primarily from the UK, doctors like Joanna Moncrief, who have completely, turned this on its head, demonstrating that in 6 decades of research, there is no science to validate a low serotonin or high serotonin or medium serotonin, theory of depression. It's really just smoke and mirrors. And the origins of it are very humble, sort of date back to the 1950s and 60s with observations around the effects of tuberculosis medications primarily. And it's not valid science. So that's why, these medications don't do what we, sort of believe that they do. And they actually, which is correct a problem, and they actually create a very particular kind of imbalance. It's quite a different story than what we've been led to believe.
Yeah, it really is. And I know my doctor meant well, but she did tell us that it was okay to go on medication for life, and that a lot of people do, and that that's not a problem. But, when I start reading about other people's stories that have had terrible reactions to medications, I read a story recently and actually talked to the lady who has a new blog. She's just started to share her story, and she talks about how she was diagnosed with postnatal depression after her second baby, and it was really hard for her. And so she went to the doctor. The doctor straight away, in 15 minutes gave her antidepressants, didn't check her health, didn't check her hormones or anything. It was just talking to her, gave her antidepressants, and that started her off on a 12-year journey of psychosis that just got worse and worse, more and more medications. We're going to interview her soon, actually, and on the podcast, but so I won't tell the whole story because I'll spoil it. But it took her a fair while to get off those medications, and when she did, she found that she hadn't been going through psychosis naturally. It wasn't anything actually wrong with her body. She was probably exhausted and down from having a second child, and her body was run down, but she wasn't bipolar like they told her, and she wasn't psychotic. She had all these issues due to the medication she was taking, and now they tell her her body is poisoned because of the medication, and she's got all sorts of health issues. Now, what do you do when someone comes into your clinic and they have been on these medications for many years and you're trying to help them to get off naturally? That's a gigantic thing, and I know it was for this lady. What can you tell us about that?
Well, that story couldn't be more resonant for me. I mean, it just, enrages me still. I've been in the trenches on this issue for, a decade, and hearing a story like that, I just want to scream from the mountaintops. It's so fundamentally, divergent from what the practice of medicine should be. We've totally abandoned the first do no harm oath. We are using our patients as, sort of pawns in a sort of a system that really puts profits of industry above and beyond the experience of the individual. And the truth is that most practitioners don't have the time, interest, or incentive to research what they are told. They just accept it. And, it's only through personal experience that you ever have any incentive to actually ask, where do we get this information from? Is it actually valid? And so I so sympathize for her experience. And God, I mean, put her in touch with me. So, I do work with a lot of women in this case. Many of my patients have very similar stories where they were first medicated postpartum or around perimenopause. They never had any history prior to that. And of course, my belief is that there's an immune and inflammatory underpinning to a lot of what we are calling mental illness in that time. But, it's very easy to slap a very poorly studied medication onto a situation. And the risks of these medications are such an untold story of the risks. Yeah. I mean, me neither. And I prescribed them for years, It's just not popularized. And the pharmaceutical industry does everything in their power to conceal this. They have locked file drawers filled with papers that demonstrate, increased risk of impulsivity, suicide, homicide, mania. It's horrendous. So let alone the long-term risks of what you're alluding to, which is something I've developed, quite passionate feelings about, because it's, I never spoke to a patient when I started them on a medication about the fact that they may never be able to come off this medication. So, unlike heroin and crack cocaine and alcohol and OxyContin, these medications sometimes require, dose tapers over years. Patients can maintain stability. I mean, have you ever heard of such a thing? It's really beyond the pale when it comes to habit formation. I mean, these medications are so exquisitely habit forming that some patients can never actually come off them. And we have been telling patients that it's their illness, right? Like that nurse said to her, right? It's your illness. You're so sick. Look how sick you are. You can't live with this medication. But in fact, the primary literature is finally validating what patients have been saying, in grassroots support groups for years, which is that this is not my illness. This is a withdrawal. This is a chemical withdrawal. And so, in the end, the truth will out. I have to believe that. And obviously that's what I'm here to help.
So quite often someone's told that they've got depression or bipolar and it's an illness and they need to go on medication, which will probably be for life. But the reason for the illness has not even been looked into. They haven't had any tests to work out what's going on in their bodies. It's not really even considered part of the equation to look into diet or anything like that. I just think that's so sad and it's so wrong.
It really is. And the truth is that, a lot of what I'd like to reframe is that depression, bipolar, schizophrenia, panic disorder, these are not disease entities. These are not actual things. They don't have genetics behind them. They don't have a known chemistry behind them. And they certainly don't have a valid treatment that results in, easily replicated, outcomes over large swaths of the population. These are terms. They're just descriptive terms, like a fever, right? So a fever is not a disease. It's just it's an indication that there is an underlying imbalance, and that imbalance can range from physiologic to nutritional, endocrine, hormonal, gut to psychospiritual. And until you can individually examine what is driving it, you won't have any idea how to enter and how to potentially reverse it.
So when someone comes to you for help, do you help them to get the tests done that can determine what's going on in their body and to figure out what's causing the distress? Is that how you begin working with them?
Yes. So when I with a patient, that's my primary goal, is to try and identify what is driving what we are calling psychiatric in nature. My assumption is that it's anything but a brain chemistry imbalance. And so I do basic diagnostics, that I talk about in A Mind of Your Own. I do.
I meant to mention your book. You need to tell us about that as well.
Sure. Sure. It just came out in March and is basically, my effort to get self-healing tools into the hands of every single person that needs it to avoid situations like the one you just described, where it's very hard to learn that way. And it's not necessary, to go through that kind of trauma to get the information you need to help yourself on your own, even without any clinician at all. So, yeah, so there's some basic diagnostics that actually you could do at pretty much any cooperative doctor. In the States, there are even methods to do it, without a doctor, go to the lab yourself. But those are done really in the setting of the most important initial thrust of the program, which is dietary, right? So all of these, whether it's a thyroid condition, blood sugar imbalance, a food reaction, all of these different drivers are reversible sometimes within a month on a whole food diet. It's like literally the panacea for all that ails you. And the truth is you may be concerned about psychiatric symptoms, but you might find that if you adhere and really commit to seriously a month of a whole foods diet, you have all sorts of side benefits, right? Like your libido comes back and your hair looks great and you lose those 10 pounds. Oh, and by the way, your brain fog and panic attacks and, chronic depression of 20 years have also shifted. So I feel very passionately about it. I have learned over the years, that there is essentially a template, even though I certainly don't believe that there's one diet for everyone. I do believe that when your primary experience is one of what you would describe as depression, meaning flat mood with some irritability, feelings of sort of hopelessness, insecurity, poor self-esteem, amotivation, sort of, poor concentration, this sort of the syndromal picture that this approach, which actually is a red meat inclusive diet, is extremely effective. It's very high in natural fats, which is an easy way to undo a lot of blood sugar destabilization. And so you end up, having a palliative effect on so many different areas of the body, from the gut to the hormonal system, of course, then to the brain, because we now know the gut and the brain are inextricably connected. And so while I ask people to do that, we are also beginning to, sort of reframe their day-to-day experience. So I ask them to do 3 minutes of medical meditation every single day. So just 3 minutes. I found that that's very manageable, especially for a lot of the moms that I work with. I ask them to do 20 minutes of more intensive exercise, like called burst training, one time a week. So just once a week. And then to begin the process of internal and external detoxification. So some of my patients end up needing to do coffee enemas depending on their medication and chemical exposure history. I have recommendations around simple kinds of baths you can do. And then also, beginning the process of greening your home, meaning your cosmetics, your products, your cleaning products. Looking at the water you drink, it's a big issue here that our water is fluoridated, has chlorine in it, has even medications in it, let alone disinfectant byproducts. So while, hydration is important, you could end up doing more harm than good that way. So these sorts of changes that you can make over time, but you begin to really shift your mindset, and you shift out of a mindset that says, my body is a minefield of mistakes and I need, doctors and chemicals to manage it, and it's scary as hell. And you shift into a mindset that says, you know what? Everything I've ever needed is already here. I actually just need some reminders maybe and minor guidance, but I got this. I got this, and it's going to seem challenging because it involves this shift in mindset. But in the end, your life gets so much simpler. I have a doctor in I don't even know how long, a decade. I don't have any relationship to the healthcare system apart from, energy healers and other folks that I consider sort of my wellness and prevention investment. But it's such an easier life, and my patients would say the same thing. You just all of the white noise of fear around illness just melts away, and it's a way to take back control.
Yes, I think you're right. It does really simplify life and health to get back to eating simple, real foods and living the way that we were meant to live. I know with our own son, when we had to change our diet, it just changed everything. I should quickly tell you our story because you don't know. My son came down with really severe anxiety and depression nearly 2 years ago, and he was 13 at the time, and it turned out he had severe OCD, and we went to the doctor to get help. He was put onto medication, but I never wanted that to be the long-term solution. We were just desperate and didn't know what else to do. And of course, the doctor said, it's fine for life. You can just keep taking this. We'll see how it goes, but it's no problem. But I said to my son straight away, you're not going to be on this for life. We might do this for a couple of months while we get other things going to help you cope, but it's not going to be something we're going to do for life. Thankfully, we straight away went onto the GAPS diet, and that really, really helped. And the doctor was amazed by how quickly he healed, and so was the psychologist. And he skipped whole sections of the CBT training. He was not needing all the counselling. He didn't need the length of time that most people need. And, after a couple of months, the doctor said, well, usually we're upping the medication by now, because he was on a very small dose. And she said, but he doesn't need it. And I said to the psychologist, why do you think that is? Do you think that the diet is helping? Do you think it's just the medication? Do you think it's both? What do you think? So I was interested to see her take on it. And she said it's definitely not the medication. She said, yeah, usually they need more by now, and they need a lot of counselling. He's getting well very quickly. And she ended up coming to a seminar that Pete Evans did up in Cairns, and Isaac and I both spoke at the seminar, and he told his story in front of 200 people, and she came to that, and that was great. She understood that it was the diet that was really helping him. Whenever I talked to the doctor about it, at first she would kind of change the subject. I don't think she was comfortable with the idea of the diet being something that would heal anxiety. But when we went back at the 6-month mark to decide whether, to get him off the medication and all of that kind of thing, he was so much improved that she called the student doctor in and said, you need to talk to this lady about what she's done with her son. Tell her about the diet, Joe. So I was so excited that, both the doctor and the psychologist had agreed that the diet did have an impact on his mental health. So, yeah, that was very exciting. And he's completely off medication now. He is very happy and totally a different boy. And I think it's mostly to do with the diet. That we also did a lot of other things, worked on his health in other ways as well, with chiropractic and different things. But the diet was a very big part of it for us.
Oh, yes, you should be congratulated for that hesitant concession, because there's no question that there's a relationship. And really the truth is that the very scientific literature that people sort of refer to as the holy grail of all things true has been discussing the gut-brain connection and the relevance of diet for many decades now. And it's just a matter of how long it takes for that information to trickle into the average clinician's office. And who has the time to wait for that? We need this information now, and it's already out there. The discipline is called psychoneuroimmunology, and it's basically about how you heal gut pathology, which can arise from, medication exposures like antibiotics, can arise from environmental exposures like, chemicals, even the fact that we don't have exposure to a lot of things and different kinds of germs and bugs and worms that we did we did. So there are so many factors in the modern era that are disrupting our gut physiology, the way that we're born, it's completely been derailed. So there are many reasons why we could be struggling, and some people manifest their gut pathology psychiatrically, and that might be the genetic part, why you manifest, inflammatory and immune dysfunction psychiatrically, but it certainly doesn't mean that it's something you inherited and now there's nothing you can do about it but take a pill.
Yes, and that's what we've heard so much for so many years, that it's genetic, there's nothing you can do about it. And I just will mention also another thing in my family. I thought that my grandfather was very healthy and my grandmother, and, they'd always eaten real food and all of that kind of thing. And my mum always made a point that, they're very healthy. They didn't have any problems from eating, the way they ate. And then only the other day, Mum mentioned something to me about Grandpa, that he was on antidepressants pretty much as long as she can remember. And she'd always been told it's a chemical imbalance. There's nothing he could do about it. It's genetic. And so he had to take these pills all his life. And she said, oh, that's probably why your kids have these issues, because it's genetic. And I thought about that, and I thought, you know what? That's not true. There's just so much that we've been told that's not right. And maybe there was things in his environment, even back, 50 years ago, that caused issues for him. Maybe there's the genetic propensity towards, like you say, towards psychiatric issues if you get things out of alignment, if the gut's not working properly and stuff. But yeah, it's not as easy as just popping a pill. It's something, there is something we can do, but I don't think that's a bad thing. And like I often say on my Facebook page, I have been slammed on there before for saying, how exciting is this? There's things that we can actually do to make our kids better. And I think that that's a great thing because it gives us hope. But some mums get offended by that and say, oh, you're saying I'm a bad mum because I haven't done all these things and that's why my kid's sick, and they'll actually get offended at that. But I don't mean it that way. I actually mean it in the way that there's so much we can do, and we have hope of our kids getting better. I think that's a great thing.
I mean, it's empowering, absolutely.
One thing I wanted to ask you, so when you have a child like my son who, I didn't tell you my whole story, but when he was at his worst 2 years ago, he was so bad that none of us were coping, and he would just scream and cry, throughout the day, and he just would, at 11 o'clock at night, he'd be sobbing and sobbing and sobbing, and it got to the stage where he couldn't feed himself. I was having to feed him. I was having to take him to the toilet. I was having to dress him and try and he couldn't get in the shower. He couldn't do school. He couldn't go places. So I was desperate, and that's why I took him to the doctor and got the medication, because I was so desperate. We just needed something done straight away. It was urgent. It was scary. What do you say to the people who have these kind of things happening in their family? I know you're saying don't put them onto medication, but what if you're so desperate and scared and worried and you don't know what to do? For a lot of people, the idea of doing a diet for 1 month, that's really frightening, because they don't know if they can cope for that long. That's especially the person who's going through the anxiety and depression. What if, they feel like they need something more than the diet? Do you ever give them supplements from the start, or what do you do to help them right from the start?
Yeah, so, I normally don't recommend supplements the first month, because I feel very strongly about the experiential learning that comes with using diet food first. Because if we're papering over the situation with, imagine meds, but even supplements and dietary change, and things feel better, then it's never, the body and mind never connect around the power of intervention. So I tend to really foreground that and just ask for, trust in the process, patience, and we work around releasing fear. And I am, really into, as I mentioned, Kundalini Yoga, and there are actually thousands of medical meditations in Kundalini Yoga that can have nervous system effects within minutes. I really have never found anything quite as effective in terms of changing, sort of experiences of negative thoughts, of hopelessness, of acute anxiety as these types of breathing practices. So I always assign those to my patients, and I expect them to do it every single day, no excuses. And then, on rare occasions, I will use a supplement. There are upfront. There are supplements like, amino acids like L-theanine, for example. Yeah, and, they're safe, and for many patients, they're very effective. Pharma GABA is another one that I have a lot of experience with. N-acetylcysteine is another. Then there are herbs, of course, like valerian or kava, that have, somewhat unpredictable effects, but not dangerous ones. But if they are a good fit, you'll know within an hour. Yeah. So these aren't like necessarily long trials where you need to sort of see what's going to unfold. I mean, certainly the benefits can accumulate over time, but you sort of know whether it's a good fit pretty quickly. And so those can be helpful as well. But a lot of what I do is try to hold space for suffering, because until we can all collectively appreciate that when we reflexively react to struggle and suffering, we make mistakes. We'll never get where we need to go. And part of it is just understanding that sometimes we move through difficult things. I mean, any woman who's had a natural childbirth knows that you just can't fight it. The more you fight it, the more, right? And you end up, on the surgical table. So it's an important lesson that we just haven't been supported in learning because of the way our society is set up.
I think you're so right. We do try to put a Band-Aid over everything and take a pill and not have to feel anything that's unpleasant, but we really have to learn how to work through these things, don't we? And that's something that we're working on in our family. So thank you for all your tips, and I'm really looking forward to reading your book and to hearing you speak at the forum. It will be very exciting to meet you. Do you want to just quickly tell the readers a little bit more about the book and where to find you online?
Well, I'm very excited to meet you both. The book is called A Mind of Your Own, and it's available, online, and it's in Australia actually already. And the first chapter is actually available free if you want to sort of get a feeling for it on my website, kellybroganmd.com. And you can check it out. I have a newsletter there where I, keep everyone updated on the latest science and recommendations around a lot of this, and love to be in touch.
Okay, thank you so much, Kelly. We really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to come and chat to us. And Isaac and I really look forward to meeting you. And
Perfect.
We'll see you soon.
Thank you. Total pleasure.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
This has been a production of TheWellnessCouch.com. Check us out on Facebook and join in the conversation on Facebook.com/The Wellness Couch. Subscribe to each show on iTunes and check us out on Twitter. The Wellness Couch, streaming wellness into your lives. Whilst the Wellness Couch presenter endeavor to provide accurate and helpful information to their listeners, these podcasts cannot take into account individual circumstances and are not intended to be a substitute for health and medical advice from a qualified health professional. You should always seek the advice of a qualified health professional before acting on any of the information provided by any of the Wellness Couch podcasts.